Another day, another story. Hello and welcome back, dear viewers. This is Jason bringing you the second and final part of our revenge story. If you haven't listened to the first part, make sure to check the link so you don't miss any of the action. Ready? Well, let us begin. In today's story, we continue where we left off from the previous video. Tom's cheating wife Rachel and her AP Miguel were served in the hotel room while they were doing some gymnastics. As you can imagine, shortly after that, my cell phone rang hot. It was one call after another, interspersed by the telltale pings of incoming messages. I ignored all of them, not in any mood to engage in any sort of communication with my cheating soon-to-be ex-wife. I did call Megan and informed her of what had gone down. She wished me luck and again reiterated that she loved me and would always be there for me. She also said she would turn her cell phone off, and that if I needed to speak to her, I could call her best friend Amanda. After I recorded the new number, I hung up. Rachel would now be incommunicado with Megan and myself. I called a local realtor and explained that I needed a short-term, about 6-month tenancy in an area close to my work. The agent, Ms. Jones, pointed me to a few possibilities along with their internet brochures. I phoned her back after 30 minutes, informing her of the one I had chosen. It was a neat one-bedroom, fully furnished apartment on the second floor of a gated community, only 10 minutes walk from my office. Perfect. I especially loved the fact that it was gated. There would be no uninvited door knocks at weird times. All I needed now was all of my belongings. I really didn't want to meet with Rachel at this point, so I devised a plan for her to be out of the house. All I needed was 2 hours. I had a trailer hooked up to my car and 3 workmates ready to go. My burner phone was going to be very useful. Rachel was a mess. First a home invasion by the SWAT team and that very embarrassing semi-arrest. She was sure that the whole neighborhood had seen her in all her bare glory. Her years of infidelity was now fully exposed to the world. Strangely, she hoped beyond hope that Tom would not see this. The arrest incident was not enough to keep her and Miguel separated for long. They clung to their need to be together even after that embarrassing expose. Their need found them again meeting up at a hotel. Then, being served at the hotel. Life couldn't get any messier. For the umpteenth time over the last few days, she shook her head and reflected on how she had landed in this pile of shit. There was no doubt in her mind that her predicament was entirely of her own making. Apart from the frequent absences, her husband was the best. He doted on her, he worked hard to make enough for a comfortable lifestyle, he loved her. She knew that deep in her heart. So why does she carry on an affair with Miguel? It's not like he was any better in bed than Tom. He didn't have the time to spend romancing her, as he did when they first met. That was mainly due now to his wife and daughter. That trophy wife who was so acceptable to the high and mighty Rodriguez family. Old man Rodriguez hated Rachel from the start. And his wife Maria always looked at her as if she was some sort of pruda, just for going out with their precious son. Rachel's family didn't live in the well-to-do side of town, but they were good, solid folk, hard-working, salt-of-the-earth people. Obviously not good enough for the Rodriguez clan. Their constant comments and haranguing slowly wore Miguel down to the point that he was reticent to even speak with Rachel. He loved the sex and he loved being with her, but every time they met, Rachel could see the over-the-shoulder glances and the guilt on his face. He eventually ended their relationship. It broke Rachel's heart. She had given her V-card and her heart to Miguel, but even though she knew he also loved her, his family had a stronger pull on his heart than her. She hated that family with a passion. She heard that Miguel had gone from girlfriend to girlfriend over the next 2 years, never settling on anyone. Maybe none of them are good enough for the Rodriguez family either. She thought with a certain sense of irony. Exactly how the next stage of their relationship started was still a blur to Rachel. She saw him on campus. She was already quite heavily involved with Tom, and knew that he was the man to be her husband, but Miguel had this attraction for her. It wasn't the sex. What was it? Maybe in some way, it was revenge on the Rodriguez family for the cruel way she was treated by them. She thought about that idea often, but realized the relationship between herself and Miguel wasn't as shallow as that. It was more. She just couldn't let go of her first love, even though Tom was there also. She and Miguel met discreetly frequently while at university. Rachel at first felt guilty about cheating on Tom. She knew it was cheating as her and Tom had discussed exclusivity many times. It was all so easy. Tom was stressed to the eyeballs finding time to study. He found time to be with her whenever he could, but she still had swathes of time to spend with Miguel. The cheating became easier and easier until it became a habit. One that was hard to break, even after she and Tom were married. She was always discreet with Miguel, making sure that any liaisons were at times when Tom was snowed under at work or off on one of his many field trips. It was all going well for Rachel, until that fateful day that she knew she was pregnant. She never used condoms with Miguel, foolishly relying on the rhythm method to avoid pregnancy. For 9 months Rachel could not be sure who the father of the baby was going to be. She prayed to any god who would listen that the baby was Tom's, but part of her secretly was intrigued by the idea that it might be Miguel's love child. The constant angst and questions about the paternity of her child played on Rachel. She later wondered if this unsettled pregnancy in some way caused the frail constitution of Megan's health. As soon as she held little Megan in her arms, she knew. It was Miguel's. She knew without a doubt. The hair color, the eyes, all told a story of infidelity, but Tom, her sweet husband Tom, only had eyes for the sweet glory of the moment. His beautiful wife and now mother of his child was all that filled his senses. He didn't have a clue. Rachel cried with joy, as most new mothers do, but her tears also were mixed with guilt. Guilt over what she knew she had to do. She had to ensure that for all intents and purposes, Megan was Tom's and hers. She was determined to follow that line for as long as possible. Of course she told Miguel, but also insisted that Megan be brought up as the daughter of herself and Tom. Miguel and her continued their liaisons as before with one exception. He had to use condoms. This wasn't going to happen again. When Megan was about to celebrate her first birthday, Rachel deepened the deception by dyeing Megan's hair to something resembling Tom's color. Many commented at her birthday party about her beautiful light brown hair, just like Tom's. Life went on with the infidelity continuing. Then Miguel got married. At first, Rachel was furious, but eventually, rationally, realized that she couldn't stop Miguel from finding a wife. She had no claim on him, apart from the fact of Megan, who was now approaching adolescence. Miguel's wife, Amanda, was stunning. She came from a rich local family, well connected to a real estate development company. Rachel was sure that her liaisons with Miguel would stop now that he had a beautiful wife. Surely he wouldn't cheat on Amanda. Her conscious brain didn't register the hypocrisy of her being willing to cheat on Tom, but that the same standard would not apply to Miguel. She was intrigued and quietly pleased that Miguel made it quite clear that their clandestine relationship would continue. Back to the present and that damned live TV coverage of the SWAT team deployment at their house. Rachel may have been worried about the possibility that Tom would see the report, but she hadn't banked on old man Rodriguez. Giuseppe Rodriguez was an avid watcher of the news channels, and when he saw the TV report, he knew immediately what was going on. "That stupid son of mine," he shouted at the mega screen in front of him. Why does he always think with his deck? Part of him understood the need for a man, especially a Rodriguez man, to bed as many women as possible, but he curbed his desires when he married Maria. She wasn't his first choice either. His parents and her parents had arranged their marriage without his input, but over the years he grew to respect, not so much love, this woman. This woman, Maria, who came from a well-heeled family and who settled into the role of a dutiful wife and mother. A role that she was prepared for from birth. This woman who stoically endured 24 hours of hard labor to birth Miguel, then to be told by the doctor that the difficult birth ensured she would not be able to have any more children. This woman who mollycoddled their son, Miguel. This woman who almost willed her son to quickly grow up and sire her some grandchildren. This woman who watched with trepidation as her son meandered from one meaningless relationship to another, and then finally attempted to settle for a Danish puta. One that didn't meet the Rodriguez's clan requirements. This woman who quietly waited and fretted for the right girl to surface while the cancer spread silently and insidiously throughout her body, until she died without ever holding a grandchild. Yes, thought Giuseppe. Maria would roll over in her grave if she could see what her spoiled son had been up to. The Rodriguez clan would not be happy. There would have to be an atonement. Honor demanded it. Sadly, Giuseppe realized that this may not end well for Miguel. The fact that he had been served in a sleazy hotel, along with that married puta, only added to the sheet being piled onto the Rodriguez name. For some reason, the court server felt the need to inform him of that fact, shortly after he served the papers on Rachel and Miguel. That wasn't normal procedure, so someone must have paid the server extra to do it. The clan needed to meet ASAP. Tom used his burner phone and his most disguised voice to phone Rachel and inform her that another news crew was stationed outside her home, and that it would be advisable to sleep somewhere else that night, if she wanted any peace. Rachel took the advice and Ubered to a different hotel. Things might look better after some sort of sleep. She still continued to attempt to contact Tom, but everything just went to voicemail, until the number would not respond at all. Megan's phone was the same. With no Miguel, no Tom and no Megan, Rachel felt strangely alone for perhaps the first time in her life. Meanwhile, when it became clear that Rachel would not be coming back home, me and my crew went to work. First, everything of mine was loaded into the car and moving trailer. Some had to be put into the helpers' cars as well. Next, all of Rachel's belongings were roughly packed into moving boxes and stacked into the garage. All of Megan's gear also went with mine. All of the furniture was disassembled and placed into the garage as well. Luckily it was a double garage. The last item of business was to change all of the locks except the garage automatic door. The internal door from the garage to the interior of the house was double bolted from the inside. Rachel now had access to her belongings and all of the furniture she so chose, but the house, our previous house, was off limits and completely empty. Of course, I left the original garage opener in its usual hiding place, just in case Rachel didn't take her key set with her. See, I wasn't a complete prick. This was a hell of a job, and I certainly owed my team big time. Miguel received the summons from his father shortly after being served. Miguel knew that the serving process was not of concern to him with regard to his father's summons. But what could be so important? He knew that when his father made a summons in such a way, it left no doubt that it had to be obeyed, and fast. Miguel was very nervous as he drove the distance to the family estate just out of town. If he was nervous on the drive, he nearly wet his pants and fainted when he drove onto the round entryway. There, parked in order of hierarchy, were all of the cars he knew so well since childhood. Holy shit. A clan gathering is being held, he thought aloud as he parked his car with all of the others. He was obviously the lowest on the hierarchical list, as his was the last car to arrive. All of his uncles and surviving other close relatives would be there. It was obvious that a huge decision, one which would likely affect the whole clan in some way, was about to be made. Because he didn't know the topic of the forthcoming discussion, Miguel, apart from being nervous, was very excited. He had never been allowed to attend when he was younger, and since then, these meetings were a rarity. He almost ran into the great hall of his family home. There they all were, arranged around a huge oak table. At the head was his dad, Giuseppe Rodriguez. Even though his relationship with his father was strained over the years, mainly due to his poor choices with women, he couldn't help but feel more than a little proud of his father, the head of the Rodriguez clan. It was a position that Miguel hoped he could also attain one day. As he came closer to the table, the general hubbub ceased and all eyes turned towards him. Miguel smiled at those relatives he knew, but it didn't seem appropriate to talk to any of them. The returning stares he received were either stern-looking or poker-face neutral. An uneasy knot began to form in Miguel's stomach as he sat at the only available seat at the table. It was farthest from his dad at the other end of the table. It slowly dawned on Miguel that this meeting might be about him. "Son, glad you could make it," stated his dad. As if I had a choice, Miguel thought wryly. "You know most of the men around this table, but let me introduce those you may not know." As each was introduced, they each nodded grimly while Miguel smiled nervously. Giuseppe continued. "We are here to discuss some incidents which will likely cause our family grave embarrassment and loss of honor amongst our community. This family has always enjoyed a great amount of respect from those in government, those in power, and those successful businesses that we probably helped to set up. We cannot allow this to change, or indeed disappear, because of the foolish actions of one of ours. Miguel, in case you have forgotten, during this meeting, each will get one chance to speak. After this, a vote is cast to determine the fate of the accused. The decision is final." At this, each member nodded grimly. "You are the accused, son. You get one chance to give your version of recent events, and then you will remain silent while everyone else speaks. Do you understand?" Giuseppe said this with obvious venom. "See, Papa. I understand." Every eye was upon him as he stood shakily. "How much do I tell them?" Miguel wondered. He decided to be as brief as possible while giving the basic facts. "It started when I was at university. Like all of you," and he looked pointedly at each of them, "I had my fair share, if not more, of girls. They loved my looks, and I seemed to be able to win them over easily. One day, along came a Danish beauty. She had fair skin, blonde hair and the most piercing blue eyes. I betted her and fell in love with her. I even brought her home to you, Papa, so that I could have your blessing. You and Mama refused her. She was not good enough for our family. I was told to drop her and find someone more suitable. I tried, but I couldn't. I was addicted to her. She was devastated and so was I. We both went our separate ways. She fell in love with her now husband, Tom, and I continued to play the field, hoping to find someone suitable for the family. I couldn't, but Rachel and I continued to meet even while she was committed to Tom." At this there were mutterings around the table. There were no loud outbursts, but Miguel could hear the unmistakable whispers of "Puta, bore." Miguel continued, "We carried on after they were married until I found out that she became pregnant with our daughter Megan. I wanted to ask her to leave Tom and marry me, but I knew that was impossible because everyone in my family hated her. I saw Megan once when she was a young teenager. She realized who I was and in no uncertain terms she rejected me outright. I continued seeing Rachel, but also found a woman who was deemed to be suitable to everyone. Amanda was beautiful, had the right family background and was willing to marry me. We did, and now I also have a beautiful daughter, Maria, by her. It was all going well until one day, while I was with Rachel at her place, the damn police mistakenly stormed Rachel's house, resulting in that news report. We are in the process of suing the authorities right now as we speak. Soon after that, Rachel and I met at a hotel that we thought was safe, but by then Rachel's husband Tom knew about us, and had her served at the hotel. The rest you know. Miguel hung his head in a contrite gesture, hoping to win some pity points. He sat down and waited. There was an uncomfortable wait, until, one by one, the assembled men vented their disgust at Miguel for being so blatantly adulterous and uncaring about the consequences of his lust. His own father was the last to speak. "Miguel, you are my son, my only son. What you did showed complete disregard for 2 marriages, a husband, a wife and 2 daughters. That may be forgivable, but the dishonor and shame you have brought to the Rodriguez name is not. How can we all around this table hold our heads up high, while it is so publicly known that one of us has done these things? You disobeyed a direct request from me and your mama, may she rest in peace, to not have a relationship with that pruder." His voice began to rise. There were louder murmurings of agreement around the table. "For this, you cannot be forgiven. Wait outside while we decide your fate." Miguel almost crawled out of the great hall and closed the doors. They were heavy oak doors, but he could still hear the outbursts of anger through them. Miguel did not like his chances. He knew that the punishments handed down by this group were harsh and swift, and they would be directed straight at him, and perhaps Rachel. He had to run and hope for the best. Just as his car left the estate, the clan had made its decision. They called for him, only to be answered by silence. He was to be banished to a third world country to fend for himself, until some mercy was felt by the clan, and he could return. His escape before accepting his fate like a man, however, further fueled the anger and disbelief of the assembled group. Now they openly called for blood. Giuseppe could not quite end this new call for his death. The death of his only son. The weight of the world landed squarely on his shoulders. Not only would he lose his only son, but there would be no passing of the leadership of this group on to his own family. It would now go to one of his other relatives. He would soon be delegated to another seat around the table while someone else led the clan. He would be alone, completely alone, no wife, no son and no prestige. The group had their fixed processes in place for handing down such a sentence. It was out of Giuseppe's hands. Miguel was a dead man walking. Tom received a strange phone call later that night. It was obviously anonymous and from a number he did not recognize. The caller, with a thick accent, said, "Mr. Wildthorpe, Mr. Tom Wildthorpe. We are aware of what has happened recently to your marriage. We have decided to give you justice for these grave misfortunes that have befallen you and your daughter. Our advice for you is to leave the country immediately for at least 2 weeks. Make sure that you are seen publicly at all times. This is very important. Do you understand? A certain amount of money has been placed into your apartment letterbox. This should be enough to cover your overseas trip and relevant expenses. There is also a flight ticket and your name included. The flight leaves at 6 in the morning. Please heed this advice." The phone went dead. Tom knew from the caller's tone that this was serious. The package was indeed in his letterbox. It looked like he was flying to Brisbane, Australia, and that he had 2 weeks booked at a classy Gold Coast resort. Packing was completed and he was boarding the Qantas flight the next morning. He told Megan of his trip. She was very curious, but put it down to her father needing time out after the emotionally trying time he was going through. Tom wondered what prompted this warning and didn't sleep too well all during the long trans-Pacific flight. Occasionally, he glanced around to break his boredom and musings when he spotted a woman and her daughter some seats away from him. The cursory glance played on his mind for long hours until it clicked. It was the daughter which set the puzzle in place. She looked surprisingly like Megan. A younger version of Megan. He knew who they were. It was Amanda Rodriguez and her daughter. He remembered her from his stakeout of the Bustard's house at a time which seemed so long ago. She didn't know him, so he puzzled about whether to introduce himself. In the end, he decided to let it hang, at least until they disembarked at Brisbane Airport. That's just what he did. The baggage carousel was suitably crowded, so that if there was a scene, he could easily blend into the waiting passengers. "Mrs. Rodriguez, you don't know me, but I know you," were the first words he said to her. To say she was dumbfounded would be an understatement. She went pale and furiously looked around, looking for security, or an escape route. In the end, realizing that all that was possible, because of her young daughter and lack of baggage, was to face this threat, she looked defiantly at this man and demanded, "Who are you and how do you know my name?" "My name is Tom Wildthorpe, Amanda. Your husband, Miguel, and my wife, soon-to-be ex-wife, Rachel, have been having a long-term affair, since before either you or me married them." Tom's decision to be honest, brutally honest with Amanda, had a worrying effect on her. She nearly fainted. If Tom hadn't been close enough to hold her up, she would undoubtedly have ended up out cold on the cold terminal floor. Perhaps we'd better go and sit down over there, suggested Tom, pointing to a nearby cafe in the terminal. We can get the baggage in a minute. After settling Amanda and her daughter, who clung to Amanda for dear life, they compared notes about the last 24 hours. It seemed that Amanda had also received a call similar to Tom's, and like him, she decided to take it seriously. Baggage safely retrieved, and coffee placed in front of them, Tom explained blow by blow what had transpired. Amanda was stunned and suitably silent throughout, except for the occasional outbursts of "bastard" and "that lying, cheating scum." The tears flowed freely, and Amanda's daughter, whose name was Maria, sat there aghast at her mum's use of bad language, coupled with the surreal situation she had been plucked into. They eventually taxied the long drive from Brisbane to the Gold Coast, and yes, they were booked into the same resort. It was to be a long, restless night for all. Rachel eventually ventured home to face the music with Tom. How would she explain this to the man she called husband for so many years? Her mind was still preparing a spiel for him when she arrived home. Surprisingly, her keys didn't work, but the garage opener did. The sight which greeted her as the door rose to its peak was one which devastated Rachel beyond belief. There was all of the furniture, packed neatly into all of its component bits. And the boxes, all with her name fell-penned on the sides, were also stacked into piles. On the one closest to the garage door was pinned a note. With trembling hands, Rachel gingerly picked up the note. "Rachel, by now you would have been served, you cheating, lying slut. Don't try to contact me, as by the time you read this, I will be overseas. If there is something you feel you need to say to me, contact my lawyer. Her name is Marion Smithson. Her number is 12,345,678. I have booked and paid for a one-bedroom apartment for the next 6 months. It is at 432 2nd Street, Unit 5. The keys are on top of the first box. How you get there with all of your stuff is up to you. If you decide or not to stay at that apartment is up to you, but after the 6 months, you are on your own. Hopefully, if you have signed the divorce papers, we will almost be divorced by then, and the sham which was our marriage would be history. Megan already knows what you and that lowlife, Miguel, have been up to. I filled her in on your recent adulterous actions. She didn't know that you and he continued after he sired Megan. There may be some serious bridge building that needs to happen between you and her. I want no part of it. You made the bed, now sleep in it. I hope to never see or speak to you again. Tom." If only Tom realized the prophetic nature of that last statement. It was one dripping with anger and venom as he wrote it, but even with the hatred that Tom felt towards Rachel at that time, he would have been horrified if he knew what was to befall Rachel in the future. Rachel collapsed onto the cold garage floor, surrounded by what was left of her marriage and life with Tom. All that was left were boxes of meaningless possessions and feelings of loss and despair. She gradually realized what she had done. There would be no going back from the mess she had created. The move to her new apartment went smoothly, as everything was already packed and prepared for relocation. The act of unpacking and positioning her stuff only added to her feelings of despair and hopelessness. It was a cold life she now had to look forward to. Somehow, she managed to have the apartment looking something like home, but she was constantly aware that it was a hollow, cold home. What was she to do? The apartment was paid up for 6 months, but she had no job. That would have to be her priority. She didn't know where to begin. The feelings of hopelessness, loneliness and despair threatened to overtake her. From somewhere deep inside, she dredged up her determination. She would not give up. This she knew, and the knowledge of her natural strength buoyed her through many of the dark days ahead. Application after application were completed, but no one she applied to were willing to employ someone of her age, with no experience in building design. Rachel started to regret not dipping her feet into the employment field earlier, while she was younger. When she had just about given up hope, she received a phone call from a Miss Santiago from a building company called Mexico Designs and Construction. "Mrs. Wildthorpe, we see that you are looking for employment in the building design business." "Yes, I sure am," replied Rachel. "Well, we may have a position for you. It would only be for 6 months and will require travel abroad. Would you be interested in such a job, Mrs. Wildthorpe?" "Absolutely," replied Rachel, trying not to sound overeager. "There could be small problem though. Well, I am not committed to any family responsibilities at present. My apartment has a lease which would expire sometime during that job period." "That would not be a problem, Mrs. Wildthorpe. May I call you Rachel?" "Yes, certainly. You see, one of the perks of undertaking such a job is that we would assume responsibility of your apartment during your travel abroad. When you return, you could simply resume payments, etc. of your lease. We even notify your landlord of the reason for your absence in case there are any unforeseen circumstances. Your utilities, insurances and other expenses would also be covered. How does that sound, Rachel?" "That sounds fantastic. When would you expect me to begin?" Well, as soon as possible, really. We do have an interview process, and we would need to check your qualifications more thoroughly. How does tomorrow sound for the interview? And if we are all satisfied with what we see, the start would be next Monday with a fly out on Sunday. If that is okay, I will see you at our office at 9 tomorrow morning. Miss Santiago, call me Juanita, then proceeded to inform Rachel of the address and what was expected in terms of dress etiquette for the interview. Rachel could not believe her luck. Her enthusiasm clouded some of the weird requests regarding the interview, however. The request that she wear tight-fitting attire simply skipped her spidey senses. Maybe it was that she had been out of the job scene for so long that she was completely out of touch with what was normal these days. She took ages deciding what to wear for this interview. Her bedroom was a mess of discarded and possible outfits. Finally, she settled on a tight-fitting suit ensemble, one which accentuated her bodily assets. It made the size of her boobs obvious without revealing too much. The neat white shirt she wore under her jacket was opaque enough to not need a bra. She also decided to wear a G-string thong, so that no panty line would be obvious. Finished with some medium high-heel professional shoes, she was a sight to see. Her hair and makeup also added to the look of a professional businesswoman. Rachel waited nervously in the small office waiting area. A secretary typed incessantly while Rachel waited, and the constant sharp sounds only added to her angst. Finally, a young lady emerged from an office door and introduced herself as Miss Constantine Santiago. Come on through, Rachel. You're a sight to see. I will be conducting the interview along with Marcel Venzuela and Diego Consorta. They are the building company's directors. She then directed Rachel towards the middle of the office. The two men sat behind a large mahogany desk. Something about them seemed odd, but Rachel dismissed this feeling as due to her nervousness. Let me take your jacket before you sit down, Rachel, Constantine kindly requested. Rachel obliged, but was extremely aware that now she was only wearing a shirt without a bra under. And the air conditioning was starting to play havoc with her sensitive nip-nips. So, Rachel, you wish to work for us on a 6-month contract. I can tell you that the money will be more than you will earn here, especially with your lack of experience. However, your experience in other areas will likely stand you in good stead. At this last comment, Rachel glanced suspiciously at the speaker, but Constantine quickly deflected the looks and silent question with, "What do you mean, Rachel, is that as a mother, your organization skills would be well developed?" Rachel looked directly at Constantine and replied, "Yes, certainly. Being a mom does prepare you for many logistical challenges." Rachel was not aware at first that the two men seemed to be more interested in her nips than anything else, although they at times glanced over the rest of her toned body. It was the sideways glances to each other, accompanied by sleazy smirks, that alerted Rachel to the true nature of these men. Constantine seemed to be keeping her attention with demanding questions. At the end of the interview, the two men nodded at Constantine and abruptly left the office. "Well," said Constantine, "that went well. Both directors are pleased with what they saw and heard. I can safely say that you have the position. You will fly to Mexico City this Sunday. A limousine will meet you at the airport and take you to the building site office. It is a fair drive, unfortunately, but I hear that the limousine has all sorts of refreshments on board. Lucky you. The company representative will take care of the apartment details tomorrow. Welcome aboard, Rachel. We hope that you will enjoy the positions that you will find yourself in. I mean position, of course. Thank you for coming today. I probably won't see you again, as I am only employed to fulfill this side of the employment contracts. Goodbye and good luck." With that, she led Rachel to the door. Rachel was in a whirl. It all seemed to go so fast. Her concerns about the true motivation of the two directors were quickly lost behind a feeling of elation. She had done it. She now had a future, one which didn't rely on Tom or Miguel. Rachel was walking on air as she left to go back to her apartment. What Rachel didn't see is that as soon as she left the office, high on elation at actually getting her first job, one that promised great rewards, Constantine and the secretary rapidly started dismantling everything which made the room look like a legitimate office. By the time Rachel arrived back at her flat, the rooms that she was interviewed in were completely empty and sanitized of all NA samples. The flights went smoothly and, as promised, the limousine picked her up at Mexico City Airport. The driver took her 2 suitcases and, Rachel noted, roughly threw them into the back. He did, however, show Rachel how to help herself to the drinks fridge inside the vehicle. The drive through the crowded city soon became very boring, so Rachel availed herself of the many drinks on offer. What she didn't and couldn't know was that each drink was loaded with a powerful sedative, one which soon had Rachel sound asleep, then unconscious. The driver noted this, then made a call. 4 hours later, the limo stopped at a medium-sized town. It stopped behind a nondescript building. It looked like a medium-sized motel of some description which had a cantina out front. Rachel was completely unconscious still, so she did not register what happened to her on arrival. Two men carried her into one of the many rooms and completely undressed her. There, the two proceeded to take advantage of her. After they were done, other men entered and took their turns with her. This went on for at least 2 hours when Rachel started to become conscious. They left her alone then, knowing what was coming when she was fully awake. This room, called the initiation room by those in the know, was virtually soundproof. It had no windows, and the door was securely barred on the outside. The lights went out, so when Rachel awoke, she saw only blackness. What she felt, however, was pain. Excruciating pain. Her count ached with unbelievable intensity. Her back hole was so sore, she dreaded having to defecate. Her mouth was swollen beyond belief, and all over her was the unmistakable sliminess of release. Her eyes even hurt where some had entered them. All she could do was scream continuously until her throat was hoarse. She flailed about helplessly in the utter darkness. She bumped, fell against the metal frame bed again and again. Eventually, she fell onto the dirty rough mattress and curled up into the fetal position. A fitful semi-sleep was her only relief. What Rachel was to learn eventually was that she had been sold to a minor drug cartel which operated out of this town. She was the gringo boar used as reward for loyal cartel workers. The cartel boss was very good friends with the Mr. Giuseppe Rodriguez. This was a special favor on the part of Mr. Rodriguez. Rachel's landlord was very pleased to meet the South American gentleman who paid up Rachel's rent and utilities for the next 2 years in advance. He produced a very official-looking employment statement, explaining that Mrs. Wildthorpe had been contracted to work out of country, and that unfortunately, because of the nature of her employment site, would be uncontactable. Helen gave the landlord an address which to send any correspondence to in her absence. This address was, also unfortunately, non-existent. Both Megan and Tom never heard from Rachel again. They were informed by her landlord of the recent job situation, and accepted it as Rachel's way of disappearing. The divorce went through uncontested. Meanwhile, Miguel was not faring very well either. His short dash for freedom from his relatives ended in a hotel in a small Midwestern town. The midnight call to his room was swift and silent. A well-positioned blow to the neck rapidly rendered him unconscious. It was a well-rehearsed room cleanup which left that particular hotel room without any evidence that Miguel was there at all. The cash payment for the room by Miguel also left no trace of his short stay. However, when Miguel did wake up, he instantly wished he hadn't. He was suspended by his neck over a large tub of very hot water. This in itself was not the problem, however. He realized that he was bleeding into this tub of water, and from the little he could see, confirmed that the pain coming from his groin area was real. He glanced around and saw, to his horror, on a stainless steel tray, a severed clock, and what looked like 2 testicles. With a screaming of anguish and disbelief, he also realized that they were his. His thrashing only increased the blood flow and pain, but there was nothing he could do. "I see you have at long last awakened, Deckhead. Please forgive me, but I decided to alter your physical appearance slightly. Don't worry though. I only took away those bits which seemed to always get you into trouble. The bits which clouded your brain to such an extent that you forgot your family. The bits which brought dishonor and shame to our family. I would also like you to look at the large screen in front of you. It may interest you as the main actress in the show is someone you may know." Miguel glanced painfully at the screen. It seemed to be some sort of corno. He looked more closely. The scream of anguish and pain was that of a man on death's door. He saw Rachel, or what looked like Rachel. The woman he saw was staring dazedly into space. From her dilated pupils, it was obvious that she was under the influence. She moved mechanically without a sound as 3 men, unwashed and grimy, plowed into her 3 holes. He saw them calm, then immediately be replaced by 3 others. By the sheer quantity of calm on Rachel's body, Miguel realized that this had gone on for some time. "Great job she is doing, isn't it?" said the voice to Miguel. "She is in great demand. That empty puta is the closest that these workers will ever get to a white kitty," or asked. He laughed. "She may however not just give them a white receptacle for their cum. Apparently she already is HIV positive and has some other STDs as well. Ah, the gift that keeps on giving. What a shame she will not survive long enough to actually be officially diagnosed. Are you happy, Miguel? Are you happy with what your infidelity, your disloyalty and your selfishness has caused? Maybe now you can see why I removed the offending bits from your body. I am going to leave you now. I will not be back, but our cleanup team will come back in 3 days. By then, you should have bled out. The painkillers which I pumped you with should run out in an hour or 2, so you will become fully aware of what you have lost. I am, however, not a heartless person. I will allow you to be entertained during your final hours. Enjoy Rachel's adventures to the fullest." The man left Miguel after turning the sound of Rachel's grape and torture up to maximum. Giuseppe received the phone call just before dinner. He listened grimly and mumbled, "Gracious. Another sad episode in his life was played out. But, he thought grimly, it won't happen again. Tom did spend a great deal of time with Amanda at the Gold Coast. It seemed that the place was created for romance. Even though the feelings of mutual attraction were muted by recent events in both of their lives, Tom and Amanda developed a strong friendship in those 2 short weeks. They never left each other's sights. There wasn't any sex then. That would come later. And much later would come the wedding rings. In amongst all of this tragedy, 2 hurt people found some semblance of peace and normality, and more than a little love. The police knew they had no hope of pinning any of the disappearance of their ex-spouses on Tom or Amanda. Their alibis were just too solid. Just another 2 cold cases to add to the increasing pile. And who really cared anyway? Tom knew he had one final act to perform in this tragedy. It was something he was not looking forward to. His now wife, Amanda, encouraged him to do this as a final act of cleansing. The door to the mansion opened to reveal a well-dressed manservant. "Please follow me, Mr. Wildthorpe," the servant said. Tom was led into a large hall with a huge oak table placed dead center. Seated at one end was an old man. He looked like an older version of the deckhand who seduced Rachel. "What can I do for you, Mr. Wildthorpe?" the man asked. "Mr. Rodriguez, I wish the circumstances under which we have to meet were different, but such is life." "Yes, Tom. May I call you Tom?" "Call me Giuseppe. We are unfortunately intimately connected by this sad tragedy, so the need for formality, I think, is redundant. Now to what do I owe this meeting?" "Giuseppe, I know that you are aware that your son's ex-wife, Amanda, and I have married. She is no longer Rodriguez, but now Wildthorpe. I also know that this must be devastating for you. He was your only son and now seems to have disappeared, along with Rachel. Believe me when I tell you that I have tried relentlessly to find them, but to no avail. I can only think that they have disappeared because of the shame that they must feel for their actions. I have now moved past that feeling of anger and betrayal. My love for Amanda, her daughter Maria and my daughter Megan have killed the hate. Something I am very grateful for." A profound sadness seemed to overtake Giuseppe. He slumped physically into his seat. "Yes, Tom. Both of them now have their just rewards." He glanced at me, expecting me to request an explanation, but my gut told me to leave it alone. It told me that I would be better off not knowing. "Giuseppe, I know the feeling of loss which you must be experiencing. I came to offer you some solace in your time of sadness. You know that Megan, my daughter, is actually the child of your son and my ex-wife. She is your granddaughter as much as she is my daughter. Maria, Amanda's daughter, is also your grandchild. You have 2 beautiful grandchildren. I am offering for you to remain part of their lives. They need to remain connected to their family roots. You are the only remaining part of their Rodriguez history. They need you." Tears flowed freely down Giuseppe's cheeks. He took a while to gather his emotions and control them. "You don't know what that means to me, Tom. I would be honored to be a more active grandfather to my grandchildren. This huge house is cold and empty. It needs the joy, laughter and family familiarity of children running around its corridors. Thank you from the bottom of my heart, Tom." He then stood up and walked towards me. I wasn't expecting the full hug, but it somehow didn't feel strange. There was an integrity and depth of feeling transferred between us that only 2 people who have seen hell and survived appreciate. He whispered hoarsely into my ear, "You are welcome at this family table, Tom." As he released the hug, he gathered his voice and said, "We have a meeting of the clan this Sunday. It would again be my honor for you, Amanda and the girls to attend, so that I can properly introduce their relatives to them. I have a feeling that my clan members would be very pleased to welcome the new members." And there we have the final part of our story. I hope you liked it, stay safe and I bid you goodbye for now.